Cannery Row, Chapter 6, Part 1 of Chapter 6. Doc was collecting marine animals in the great tide pool on the tip of the peninsula. It is a fabulous place. When the tide is in, a wave-churned basin, creamy with foam, whipped by the combers that roll in from the whistling buoy on the reef. But when the tide goes out, the little water world becomes quiet and lovely. The sea is very clear, and the bottom becomes fantastic with hurrying, fighting, feeding, breeding animals. Crabs rush from the frond to frond of the waving algae. Starfish squat over mussels and limpets, attach their million little suckers, and then slowly lift with incredible power until the prey is broken from the rock. And then the starfish stomach comes out and envelops its food. Orange and speckled and fluted nudibranches slide gracefully over the rocks, their skirts waving like the dresses of Spanish dancers. And black eels poke their heads out of crevices and wait for prey. The snapping shrimps with their trigger claws pop loudly. The lovely colored world is glassed over. Hermit crabs, like frantic children, scamper on the bottom sand. And now one, finding an empty snail shell he likes better than his own, creeps out, exposing his soft body to the enemy for a moment, and then pops into the new shell. A wave breaks over the barrier and churns the glassy water for a moment and mixes bubbles into the pool, and then it clears and is tranquil and lovely and murderous again. Here a crab tears a leg from his brother. The anemones expand like soft and brilliant flowers, inviting any tired and perplexed animal to lie for a moment in their arms, and when some small crab or little tide pool Johnny accepts the green and purple invitation, the petals whip in, the stinging cells shoot tiny narcotic needles into the prey, and it grows weak and perhaps sleepy, while the searing, caustic digestive acids melt its body down. Then the creeping murderer, the octopus, steals out, slowly, softly, moving like a gray mist, pretending now to be a bit of weed, now a rock, now a lump of decaying meat, while its evil goat eyes watch coldly. It oozes and flows toward a feeding crab, and as it comes close, its yellow eyes burn, and its body turns rosy with the pulsing color of anticipation and rage. Then suddenly it runs lightly on the tips of its arms, as ferociously as a charging cat. It leaps savagely on the crab. There is a puff of black fluid, and the struggling mass is obscured in the sepia cloud, while the octopus murders the crab. On the exposed rocks out of water, the barnacles bubble behind their closed doors, and the limpets dry out. And down to the rocks come the black flies to eat anything they can find. The sharp smell of iodine from the algae, and the lime smell of calcareous bodies, and the smell of powerful protein, smell of sperm and ova fill the air. On the exposed rocks, the starfish emit semen and eggs from between their rays. The smells of life and richness, of death and digestion, of decay and birth burden the air, and salt spray blows in from the barrier where the ocean waits for its rising tide strength to permit it back into the great tide pool again, and on the reef the whistling buoy bellows like a sad and patient bull. In the pool, Doc and Hazel worked together. Hazel lived in the palace flophouse with Mac and the boys. Hazel got his name in a haphazard a way as his life was ever after. His worried mother had had 7 children in 8 years. Hazel was the 8th, and his mother became confused about his sex when he was born. She was tired and run down anyway from trying to feed and clothe 7 children and their father. She had tried every possible way of making money. Paper flowers, mushrooms at home, rabbits for meat and fur, while her husband from a canvas chair gave her every help his advice and reasoning and criticism could offer. She had a great aunt named Hazel who was reputed to carry life insurance. The 8th child was named Hazel before the mother got it through her head that Hazel was a boy, and by that time she was so used to the name and never bothered to change it. Hazel grew up, did 4 years in grammar school, 4 years in reform school, and didn't learn anything in either place. Reform schools are supposed to teach viciousness and criminality, but Hazel didn't pay enough attention. He came out of reform school as innocent of viciousness as he was of fractions and long division. Hazel loved to hear conversation, but he didn't listen to words, just to the tone of conversation. He asked questions, not to hear the answers, but simply to continue the flow. He was 26, dark-haired and pleasant, strong, willing, and loyal. Quite often he went collecting with Doc, and he was very good at it once he knew what was wanted. His fingers could creep like an octopus, could grab and hold like an anemone. He was sure-footed on the slippery rocks, and he loved the hunt. Doc wore his rain hat and high rubber boots as he worked, but Hazel sloshed about in tennis shoes and blue jeans. They were collecting starfish. Doc had an order for 300. Hazel picked up a knobby purplish starfish from the bottom of the pool and popped it into his nearly full gunny sack. "I wonder what they do with them," he said. "Do with what?" Doc asked. "The starfish," said Hazel. "You sell them. You'll send out a barrel of them. What do the guys do with them? You can't eat them." "Then study them," said Doc patiently, and he remembered that he had answered this question for Hazel dozens of times before. But Doc had one mental habit he could not get over. When anyone asked a question, Doc thought he wanted to know the answer. That was the way with Doc. He never asked unless he wanted to know, and he could not conceive of the brain that would ask without wanting to know. But Hazel, who simply wanted to hear talk, had developed a system of making the answer to one question the basis of another. It kept conversation going. "What do they find to study?" Hazel continued. "They're just starfish. There's millions of 'em around. I could get you 1,000,000 of 'em. "They're complicated and interesting animals," Doc said, a little defensively. "Besides, these are going to the Middle West, to Northwestern University." Hazel used his trick. "They got no starfish there?" "They got no ocean there," said Doc. "Oh," said Hazel, and he cast frantically about for a peg to hang a new question on. He hated to have a conversation die out like this. He wasn't quick enough. While he was looking for a question, Doc asked one. Hazel hated that. It meant casting about in his mind for an answer, and casting about in Hazel's mind was like wandering alone in a deserted museum. Hazel's mind was choked with uncatalogued exhibits. He never forgot anything, but he never bothered to arrange his memories. Everything was thrown together like fishing tackle in the bottom of a rowboat. Hooks and sinkers and line and lures and gaffs all snarled up.